Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President. The agricultural industry collects more than $500 million a year in levies from primary producers. That money is spent on mostly R&D, some of it is spent on marketing, purportedly for the benefit of those industries that pay it. It's only reasonable, to my mind, and I think to the minds of most levy payers, that those collecting and spending the levy funds are held to account on a regular basis by those who pay the levies. In other words, that there is representation as well as taxation. Last year, the Rural, Regional and Transport References Committee conducted an inquiry into the levy payment system. It heard evidence from hundreds, certainly dozens, of levy payers to the effect that they were dissatisfied with the current system, to the effect that they didn't know what was being done with their money, the effect that they weren't sure that they should continue to pay that money, and if they were able to have some say over whether that money was they continued to pay that money and some say over how that money was spent, that they would consider that only fair and reasonable. This bill essentially says to those people, no, you're wrong. You don't need to have any say about how your money is spent. You don't need to have any say about whether or not you even pay that money. You're just going to keep paying it. It is against the spirit of the recommendations of the Rural, Regional and Transport References Committee as well, which recommended the establishment of levy payer databases in all sectors so that levy payers could be consulted. What would they be consulted about? Whether to keep paying their levies and how to spend that money. So this bill, the Dairy Amendment Levy Poll Bill, is essentially removing from dairy farmers their right to vote on their levies every 5 years. There are only two industries in which there is a right by levy payers to vote on whether or not to continue paying levies. They are dairy industry and the wool industry. The wool poll is held every 3 years, the dairy poll every 5 years. The intention, and certainly the spirit, of the Rural, Regional and Transport References Committee recommendations are that such democracy should be extended, not reduced. So what this bill will do is to remove from dairy farmers the right to have a say on whether or not to continue paying levies unless there is a proposal for those levies to change. It is directly contrary to the evidence that we heard from so many levy payers. It was also directly contrary to the spirit, if not the letter, of the recommendations of the committee. The bill proposes that once a levy is set, there is no opportunity for levy payers to have any further say on levies unless a change is proposed. And it attempts to provide dissenting levy payers with an opportunity to petition for a poll. Now this is disingenuous because it says that you will need 15% of registered levy payers to demand a poll. Even in a company, in a corporation, you only need 5% of shareholders to petition for action in a public company. This is taking the industry in exactly the wrong direction. It also sends a signal to all the other sectors that democracy is not something that's welcome. Really is not something that's welcome. You really are wasting your time if you think you are ever going to get any say over how your levies are used or how your levies are, whether or not your levies are collected. To validate that point, you just have to look at how this decision was arrived at. Dairy Australia says it conducted some kind of poll of its members in order to determine whether or not they were in favour of it. Less than 1,400 dairy farmers out of 6,288 levy-paying dairy farmers voted in favour of the proposals contained in the bill. That's just 22%. It is hardly a ringing endorsement. Now, Dairy Australia says that its changes are proposed because it is too costly and time-consuming to undertake a poll every 5 years. The fact is, neither the Minister nor Dairy Australia made any attempt to put alternative proposals to levy payers that would have made voting easier and cheaper. Hasn't anybody ever heard of SurveyMonkey? How expensive does it have to be? The fact is, the cost that Dairy Australia complains about, the $750,000 that they complain about, is attributable to campaign costs. That's the costs incurred by those who will benefit from maintaining the status quo, including, coincidentally, the directors of Dairy Australia, who want a particular outcome. This cost is equivalent to allocating the election campaign costs of the major parties to the Australian Electoral Commission and calling it the cost of running an election. It is a joke. So I'm just a crossbench senator. I only have one vote. This issue is not going to go away, though. One day, sooner or later, the Minister will want my vote. The issue will still be here. I also, Mr Acting Deputy President, I think now is the appropriate time to formally move my amendment. I have a second reading amendment which has been circulated in the chamber and will be considered at the conclusion of the debate, I understand.
Thank you, Senator Lyon.